is episode 2 of We Are Pioneers, which is a project that I'm doing with my mom. And we're talking all about, our family history from our first known ancestor all the way to current day, me. And just to recap, yesterday we talked about Princess, who was our first known ancestor who came from Madagascar. This is a story that has been passed down in our family for generations. From the 1700s, Princess came on a ship. She was going from Madagascar to France, and on her way from Madagascar to France en route, she was captured. We don't know by whom, but my mom says pirates, and was taken to Baltimore, where then she was sold in Virginia. So we talked about what that created in terms of the Curtis family. Her daughter was then sold to someone who married a Curtis, and that's how the Curtis name began. So now, after going through all that, and you see my mom in the background, she is looking at documents. But today I asked my mom if she could talk about that's my grandfather's side of the family. So today I wanted my mom to talk about my grandmother's side of the family.
Great grandfather's side of the family.
You need to turn your mic up. I can't hear you.
Oh, something.
Volume.
Can you hear it now? No? Wait.
Okay.
Wait. It's okay.
Fine. It's fine.
Yeah, no, something was leaning against it. A piece of paper was leaning against it.
It's fine now.
Okay.
Yeah.
These things are starting to fall apart.
Yeah.
They really need to be preserved. Oh.
It's okay.
Anyway.
So my name's Julia Curtis Burns. I'm the youngest direct descendant of my grandmother. And I'm the daughter of Ruth Curtis. So, yeah. You want to say anything, Mom, before we start about who you are?
You're the only descendant of your generation.
I'm the only descendant of my generation, so wow.
Your Uncle Bill and his wife didn't have kids, and Aunt Susan didn't have kids, so just me.
Think about that growing up. Yeah. Okay. So the last part of the episode 1, we ended with Grandfather Curtis, right, moving to St. Louis to start his practice there, because you were explaining that was like a self-sufficient community, and so
the
Ville, right?
Right in the middle of St. Louis, but it was a neighborhood called the Ville. It was a Black community.
Right. So it's a Black community, a Black hospital, right? And I found online that it was open from like the 1885, 1895.
Really?
Like something, maybe I'm wrong, but something like that until 1979.
Yeah. And the building that I looked up was built in 1936, but that was probably the modern version of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He and his brother was the dentist, Tom.
Right.
They both went.
So today I want to explore the other side, right?
Yeah.
Your mom, so my grandmother, whose middle name I have and whose first name you have.
Right.
So, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. And let me see the light. I guess it's fine on your face.
I have my mother's first name, Ruth.
That's what I said.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I said I have the middle name. Didn't I say that?
Yeah, oh, yeah, I was concentrating on something else.
I
Sorry.
know, that's why I said, are you ready? Are you
Yeah, go
ready?
ahead.
Is the light on
Yes,
your face? Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So walk us through. Now, I know a little bit about this side of the family of my grandmother's great grandparents, right? So there is someone named Ruffin James.
Mm-hmm.
He's the earliest known family descendant that we have on grandmother's side.
On Mima's side, we called her Mima.
Oh,
Susan,
so on your grandmother, so Mima was Susan Mabel James, right?
yeah, Susan Mabel, wait a minute, let me, Susan Mabel James Perry, because she married a Perry.
Okay, but
Okay,
her maiden name was Susan Mabel James, right?
Jane. And her father was Ruffin James, and her mother was Marina Jones James.
Right. So, but Ruffin James is the earliest on that side, on Mima's side. That was the earliest known member of our family, like the founding person.
Oh, the two of them,
Wait,
Ruffin
say
and
it again.
Marina, because of the mother
It's
and father of Mima.
okay. Wait, it's breaking up. So, can you start again?
Okay, so Mima's parents were Ruffin James and Marina Jones James. And Ruffin was from Hobgood, North Carolina, and they also had connections to Ahoskie later on, nearby. It's a nearby bigger town,
Mhm.
North Carolina. And Marina Jones was from New Bern, Bern, New Bern, North Carolina, which was a seaport up the there was a river. I think it was the News or Burn River. I don't know. That's where it got its name.
Mhm.
It was the ships with the enslaved people couldn't come directly, couldn't land directly. They had to go, so they had to offload the enslaved people onto a smaller ship and go up the river to New Bern. And Marina Jones' father was free.
Mhm.
They're all light-skinned folk. And
So they were free. Did they identify as people of color?
yes, yeah, they had to. Yeah, anybody who had any ancestors who were, from Africa were considered colored. Whatever, everybody knew who your ancestors were.
Mhm.
Anyway, he worked on the ship. He worked on the ships. He was a crew, part of the crew on ships that brought the enslaved people up the river to New Bern. And when I went to New Bern at the request of a relative, Moran Weston, that's another story. He's a priest. He was a priest. Um, um, a cousin that I was staying with in Ahoskie told me various things about the family.
Mhm.
And he said they had a little house in New Bern. They had a little plot of land, which I visited because Moran Weston wanted me to visit it, which had been in the family. I even looked the records up.
Mhm.
Had been that little plot of land. Moran was still paying the taxes on it. It was about as big as this living room. I mean, it was a small plot and they had a house on it. But when I saw it, it was just an empty plot.
Mhm.
but they bought that. I looked up the records in the city hall, and they had bought that in like in the late 1800s as a family, and they named off the members of the family too, which was interesting. But so Marina Jones James was from Marina Jones was from that family, and she married Ruffin James.
Mm-hmm.
And so they raised, you want me to keep going?
Yeah, you can move back a little. You don't have to be like yeah,
Okay.
there you go. Perfect.
They raised, I think it was 14 children. They would have had 15, but one died.
14 children.
Yeah, they had a farm. See, because, okay, let's go into that part.
Okay, but well, my first question is, how did Marina Jones meet Ruffin James? Like, how did they meet?
Yeah, I don't know, but everybody knew everybody, and there may have been a connection among families or something like that. Somehow or other they met. I'm not sure of the story. Probably somebody, some of the descendants may know the story, but I never got that part of the story.
But they were two. So Ruffin James was also from a similar background as her, because her father worked, on the port in the
Yeah,
ships.
no. Ruffin James was the son, according to information at a family reunion that we went to. Ruffin James was the son of a white Civil War Confederate, former Confederate soldier who lived on the white side of this little town.
Okay.
And he, apparently there was they would be called fancy women.
What's a fancy woman? What
Well,
does that mean?
they were women, I assume they were women of color.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know the details there, but when I went down there to visit, maybe 40 years ago, I went down and stayed with a relative, one of Mima's nephews, and he told me what he knew, and he showed me a part of town where this used to be. It was where women, I don't know whether they were available to the white men. I really don't know, but he had a child with woman, and he had another child with another woman. So it must have been a good relationship. And down there in those times, people, the white men would have relationships with women, with women of color.
Mm-hmm. Why did you change it from Black women to women of color?
Well, because back then everybody was colored. They didn't use the term black.
Oh,
Black was an insult.
why?
Well, because skin color, I mean, my guess is, and that was true even when I was a little girl in Tuskegee.
That Black is an insult?
If you called somebody you old black boy, or something like that, that was an insult, because skin color was such a survival tool, a survival advantage, because you might be able to pass, or you were light skinned. So, and the men were told to marry fair because your children would have more privilege if they were light skinned. I mean, it was a big mess. It all reflected segregation and the history of slavery. I mean, that's all it's about.
Right.
So when in the 60s and 70s, people started adopting the term Black, it was because of that. It was like saying, yeah, I'm Black.
So like the whole thing about like the whole, saying like I'm Black and I'm proud.
Absolutely.
That came from sort of like this, what do you call it?
Reaction or did not refusal to accept.
Yeah, but it's like when you take a word that used to be negative and you make,
Co-opted.
yeah,
No.
that's not the word. But anyway, when you reclaim a word like that, you know,
Okay.
that historically has been negative. Like I didn't know that. Like I
Yeah.
didn't know that saying Black people is like offensive. I know I see white people sometimes are unsure as to whether to call someone African American or Black, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because it's like which one is more PC or whatever.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But I didn't know that it was an insult to.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was for at a certain time, and it just reflected the pain of that time in terms of people being denied their rights, and if you were lighter in complexion, um, you might be treated better than somebody who looked really dark. You know, I mean, it was just an awful thing.
And you told me that there were different like ways of, right, when you were little there's like different ways of addressing skin complexion.
No, no, that was my mother telling me when she was a young
Oh,
woman.
but
We,
what were they?
she named them off one time, and I should have written them all down. I should have written them down. There were like 10 of them, and the only one I remember was chinky pin, because that meant that your skin was more yellow, like a light yellow. Yeah, which sounds racist in itself because it's like Chinese.
And who came up with this? Like,
No, those were just terms that people used.
but were they derived from slavery,
Or I don't know.
like a
I
way to distinguish, you know, different people?
yeah, different complexions. There were shades, and you would identify. You know, if you're trying to describe somebody, you know, they high yellow. High yellow was like you were brown. You had a little brown in your complexion, but basically it was very light.
Mm-hmm.
High yellow. You know.
High yellow, yeah, I heard that before.
Yeah, and then they had terms like octoroon, but those were older terms.
What's
Octoroon would be
that?
one eighth black. It's like you count your generations, and if you check back, it was like um, mostly white, but there's a black person in the background there somewhere. Octoroon, one-eighth black.
Wow.
Yeah, they had all these terms.
Like I remember hearing, even like as a kid, I remember hearing people say light, bright, damn near white,
Yeah, that was a saying. Yeah,
you know, and it was,
bright, light, bright, damn near white. Yeah.
yeah. And that, I don't know if that was like where that came from, but
Well, it's a description. It's a description because, see, the underlying thing was you were still segregated, even if you looked like a white person. Okay, so I'm going to show you. Hold on.
okay. Pull it back a little.
That's Mima standing with her arm around her mother, Marina Jones James, and one of the little brothers.
And can you lift it up? Like, yeah. And push, now pull it forward. Okay. Yeah.
You want me to show each face?
Yeah.
That's
Who's
Mima.
that?
That's Mima. And that's Marina Jones James.
Okay.
You can tell by the clothes how long ago it was.
Yeah.
Mima was born in 1888.
Yeah.
And so she looks there like she's maybe what, 11?
12.
Maybe 11
11, 12. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And then the baby.
Yeah. That may be the baby who died.
Mm.
That's another, oh no, wait, I'm wrong. Wrong generation. No, this is one of her baby brothers.
Yeah. And so what were they considered? Like, like what
Colored.
how would they identify?
Colored. They
Okay.
weren't white. They weren't white. See, white people had established all of this. And they set the laws so that if you were, what, I don't know, 3% black or something like that, if you had any African ancestry, you were colored and you didn't have the vote. See, it was all politics. That's what it was like. This Black folk were in this bubble, this high pressure bubble, and the white people stood outside and manipulated the bubble.
Mm.
And that was always, I mean, we still see it now. The guy who was just killed, who was jogging,
Yeah.
jogging while black. It's like, but here, I'll show you another picture. That was Mima when she was a young girl. This is Mima when she was an elder.
Yes.
See?
Yeah.
That's Mima. Now, if you saw her walking down the street, what would you think? A white lady. See?
Yeah, I mean, like, the thing is, like, even I haven't introduced anyone yet to pictures of Aunt Susan, but it's like, even when people would, like, growing up, when people would see, like, me with Aunt Susan or, like, me with grandma, who is Mima, the picture that you just saw's daughter,
Yeah.
right? Like, even then, people be like, oh, your grandma's white, right? And I'm like, well, I mean,
They don't know history. They don't know history. See?
I say, well, no, I mean, she's light. She's very light, yes. But as a kid, it was hard to explain that. Like,
right, because to anybody who wasn't the subject of it, see Mima, I told the story about Mima that when she would come down to Tuskegee on the train, and one time we went to pick her up in Montgomery, and she was laughing. We said, Mima, why are you laughing? She said, that conductor told me, oh, come on, you belong, this is not your car. She was riding in the colored car. It was segregated. She was riding with her people, right?
yeah.
And she says, no, this is where I belong.
Yeah.
And he just thought she was a dotty little lady. But no, see, part of it was, if you were light, you had relatives who were more obviously of color.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
unless you wanted to cut yourself off like Uncle George in Brooklyn, one of her brothers, who married a white woman and just blended in and wouldn't let the relatives call him or write to him. And he promised he would write to them once a year and say whether he's okay.
They couldn't write him back. Right.
No.
Yeah.
No, because his wife didn't know. So he just moved on he was far enough away from where everybody knew everybody that he could just blend in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, going all the way back to Ruffin James and Marina Jones James, see those, I would suspect that the woman that he had relations with, or the two women that he had relations with, and fathered Ruffin and George, half brothers, probably looked white too, or very.
He had children with.
Yeah, no, wait a minute. The Colonel Dawson.
Okay.
The white guy, the Confederate, ex-Confederate soldier who lived on the white side of town, who had Uncle Ruffin and Uncle George, Ruffin James and George James.
Yes.
by two different women. When he died, see, here was the advantage side. Here's the advantage side. When he died, he left farms to both sons.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Black people were sharecropping back then, trying to make ends meet and so forth.
And can you tell people who might not know what sharecropping is, what that is? Because some
Well,
people.
sharecropping would be there. They would live on the white man's property and have a little house and tend that part of the whatever plantation.
Mm-hmm.
And they could keep half the profit supposedly and give the other half to the owner. But it was just a step up from slavery because they would always, the people that they would bring the crops to were white.
Mm-hmm.
And they would say things like, oh, well, you know, you owed some money to the grocery store, so we have to take some of that out of it, stuff like that. So sharecropping was just a step up pretty much from slavery, which is why Black folk fled to the north in the Great Migration. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah.
Ruffin James had his own farm.
Because Colonel Dawson, when he passed away, passed it on.
Left land to the two sons. And so to Ruffin, he left a farm where they were able to have 14 children or 15 children and raise everything they needed. So that Mima said they would go into town once a year and get flour.
Once a year?
Yeah, once a year. Just to buy flour and salt, because they didn't grow wheat.
Okay.
And Mima would talk about the story about when she was a little girl, the children were not allowed in the smokehouse where they smoked the meat that they raised, the meat, that they raised cows and pigs and so forth. And then they would cut them up into hams and whatever and put them in the smokehouse. And the smoke was a preservative.
Mm.
And
so it's literally like a smokehouse, like just.
Yeah, it was like a place where you smoked the meat to preserve it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why ham has that taste, Anyway, Mima would tell the story of being a little girl and her brothers and sisters. Nobody was allowed in the smokehouse. None of the kids could go in the smokehouse. But one day her dad, Ruffin James, let her go with him into the smokehouse. And she would describe looking up and seeing all these hams and meat hanging there. And it was so fascinating to her that she had been, first of all, that she had been allowed in the smokehouse and that she saw all this food that they had, in there. So they raised their own meat. They had their own, vegetables, and they were self-sufficient.
But this was because they were given that land.
Exactly. They had, see, now the other side of this is this. Colonel Dawson, being a privileged white man, could give land to Ruffin James and George James, and nobody could say anything.
Because he was white.
Right, and he apparently was of some position in the town. And according to my mother and Mima, it was not unusual back in those times for even some white men would actually live on a farm with their family, the mother being colored. Mm-hmm. And everybody knew it was illegal to get married, and everybody knew who they were. And
together?
Yeah. They lived as a family. And
they just wouldn't be married.
They couldn't marry. It was illegal to be married, but they lived as a family in a house together you know, and mother, I told you this story. Mother said that when she was in high school and grandfather Perry was principal of the colored schools in Columbia, South Carolina, in her high school, one day this white guy comes up with a rifle
Oh yeah.
up the steps of the school and starts yelling about, y'all better leave my boy alone. Y'all better leave him alone. And apparently the kid was being bullied. That was his kid who was colored and going to the colored school. But he wasn't colored, he was white. Everybody knew who he was.
So like how many people were in this town that everyone knows who you are? Because I'm just thinking about like racially and like appearance wise and how you look. It's very psychological because it's really like, how do you know someone's white versus someone's
No.
very light?
You have to, first of all,
How do you know?
You have to think in terms of farm country. Not that many people. When you have farms spread out, you know,
Yeah.
50 acres, 100 acres, 200 acres, and a family living on the farm. Even the small town isn't that big. The small town might have some little businesses, maybe a church and, you know, maybe a lawyer or something like that. But the town was not that big. Everybody knew who everybody was.
Okay.
In the course of a lifetime, they would probably know who your ancestors were too. It's not like being in New York where you don't know who your next door neighbor is. It's like being in a little tiny village.
Yeah.
You know.
I guess like I've never experienced that growing up here in New York. So I don't even know what that would be like, you know, everyone knowing your ancestry and who your parents and your grandparents. And so, yeah, I'm just like, how do people even know like that?
Oh, they knew. They didn't have television. They didn't have telephones. They didn't have radios. What people did was they'd sit on their porches at night and talk and talk about what they knew.
Okay, so let's go back to the story.
Okay.
So the Colonel Dawson goes to this fancy women area.
Yeah.
We don't know what that means. You said you don't know what that means.
Right. Because apparently he had relationships that of respect. The fact that he knew them long enough to leave their children land.
Okay. So whether he had like a lover or like a, you know, whatever, girlfriend on the colored side of town, he had with two different women, two boys, with two different women of color.
Yeah.
Or colored women, what they were called at the time.
Yeah.
And the two boys that he had, one was Tom James.
No, George James.
One was George James and one was Ruffin James.
Right, and they were half brothers. Ruffin is our ancestor.
And Ruffin James is our ancestor. When Colonel Dawson passed away, he left to Ruffin James land, which gave him an immediate leg up in society.
Absolutely.
Because it's kind of like when if you inherit a lot of money from someone who has passed away that's your relative, or if you inherit land, or if you inherit whatever, like money, you know.
Right, a bank account or whatever.
Right. So he received this gift, this inheritance of land.
Right.
And so
see, there were places where Black people saved up their money and bought farms, like out west and so forth. And one day some Klan people would come riding in on their horses and say, "Get out." And they would just take it. And they had and the people who owned those properties had no protection. Right. They would, But so the fact that this was a situation where they were able to continue on their land and raise their children, raise their crops, and be self-sufficient tells you something about what society, what that small, tiny town society must have been like, and what race relations actually were like.
Now, here's my question. Now, I know that Ruffin James was very fair skinned.
Yeah, I have a picture of him somewhere, but and he is. Look at him. Yeah.
So, and his wife was also fair skinned, light skinned, however you want to call it. Now, my question is like, if they had been of a darker complexion, do you think that it would have been the same kind of like protection that they received?
Well, first of all, probably the relationship wouldn't have happened. See, so it would be a totally different story.
Why?
Just because, well, let's say it were the women were darker complected, for
Right.
example, and had a clearly African American child, African looking child.
Mm-hmm.
Different relationships.
But I don't know, okay, why?
Saying Colonel Dawson, definitely, I mean, I don't see him, see, Ruffin James could blend in and people could, you know, but this whole color shading stupidity really had all kinds of implications. And I'm just not that knowledgeable to go any farther than that.
Okay.
But the fact that Mima married a brown-skinned man,
Right.
you know, indicates that she knew which side she was on. Anyway, all right, so where are we?
So we're in the part where you were saying that Ruffin James meets Marina Jones. She becomes Marina Jones James. We don't know how they met, right?
Yeah.
We don't know, but we assume because it's a small town, they meet somehow.
All communities, yeah, yeah.
And then they end up having 14 children.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And Mima, whose name is Susan Mabel James before she got married, Mima was the second youngest or the...
No, she was actually the youngest because see what happened was cousin Orrin James lived in Princeville, North Carolina on the Tar River. And Princeville was the first incorporated Black town in the United States, I'm told. It was an incorporated Black town. And Orrin James and his wife, and I just know her as Grandma Cuz, that's what they called her because she was like, well, Grandma Cuz, cousin, you know.
Okay.
And so cousin Orrin and how he was connected, you know, to this extended family, I can't tell you, but he was a cousin. He was like a cousin to Ruffin James. They had no children. They couldn't have children.
Okay.
And they told Ruffin James and Marina that they would like to raise the next girl who came along. The next girl Marina and Ruffin's next girl they wanted to raise.
Mm-hmm.
And the way the story was told to me by Mima and others is that there was a girl who was supposed, you know, when she got to be a certain, you know, I don't know how old, she was going to go and she was going to be raised by cousin Orrin and Grandma Cuz.
Okay.
And she died. Her dress caught fire they were burning trash or something, and her dress caught fire and she died.
Wow.
So then Mima came along next. So Mima was the youngest girl or the next girl.
Mm-hmm.
And Mima was raised in Princeville, But she would, go back and visit her brothers and sisters. And Mima had a little tone of sadness, and she would say, and she didn't understand why she couldn't live with her brothers and sisters.
So how old was she when that happened?
I'm not sure because, this picture of her with her mother indicates that she went back and forth, but I'm not sure when she started, but apparently she had to be old enough, just a baby.
Right. Because she remembers being with her brothers and sisters.
Yeah. And then she would go back and visit them. But yeah, she remembered when she went to be with Cousin Orrin and Grandma Cuz in Princeville. And see, Cousin Orrin had a store at the crossroads in
What do you mean a store in quotes?
Hold on. At the crossroads in Princeville. That was his business. Now, Mima told me, and she would tell us, when she was about 12 years old, see, she wasn't allowed to go there.
Mm.
She and her, a young friend, a boy, decided they were going to sneak over to the store. And she said they sneaked over to the store, cracked open the door and looked in, and there were all these women and men dancing.
It was like a juke joint or a brothel?
Well, they were dancing. That's all she told me.
Okay.
They were dancing. And she said, people said it was a fancy house. Now you'd have to look up what fancy house meant back then.
Mm. Well, hey, making that money.
Yeah.
I guess.
And she had a dressmaker. They took really good care of her. She had a dress.
Who was the one who had this fancy house?
Cousin Orrin, the one who was raising her.
Wow.
Cousin Orrin and Grandma Cuz. Cousin Orrin had the Crossroads store.
It was called Crossroads Store?
No, I don't know what the name was, but there was a Crossroads in Princeville, where roads crossed. And his store was at the crossroads. That I'm just telling you how it was told to me. And Mima was not allowed in the store. She was not allowed to go to the store. And she always wondered why. So she and this friend of hers decided to sneak in and peek in the store. And that's what they saw. That's the story she told.
It was called a fancy house.
She said, well, so it was a fancy house. That's what she said.
But she didn't say anything else about that.
No, I was a kid.
Did you know how old she was when she did that?
12. She said she was 12.
She was 12?
Yeah.
So she was adventurous.
Yeah.
Okay, so she gets gifted to Orrin and
not gifted, but
she gets.
She was. They figured
bring her to them.
Right, and they visited back and forth. It wasn't like she was going to live with strangers. They all knew each other and visited back and forth. They were relatives.
So that could still be like hard as a kid. Like all your brothers and sisters live with your mom and dad, and that's your mom and dad, and you've been selected to live with your uncle and aunt.
And no, not a whole bunch of kids.
Or your cousin, right? Your aunt.
Cousins, yeah.
Yeah, and and she has all the stuff she could want, right? Like a dressmaker and all this, but she is alone without her siblings.
Right, she's lonely for her siblings. She can't understand. She never could understand. That's what she said. She couldn't understand why she was living there with them and she couldn't be living with her brothers and sisters. So that was just a little tone of sadness she had.
So
Yeah,
she lived in Princeville now.
in Princeville.
And
Now,
Princeville was the first
in
Black incorporated town.
in the United States, that's what I was told.
And what does that mean?
Well, it was officially a town. It wasn't just everybody living at it together. It was a town in North. It was in North Carolina. It was a town called Princeville officially,
Hmm.
and it was a Black town.
So it was like Black owned, or it was like Black
Well, a
claimed?
Black community. It's a Black community. I mean, it was all Black people. I mean, it wasn't like they said this is a Black town. I mean, in the state, you know, records as far as I know, but it was all Black people living. And it was on now, but see, here we go again. The Tar River flooded every year.
Uh-huh.
And Princeville was on the flood side because high ground was on the other side. So I guess it was okay for Black folk to incorporate a town that got flooded every year.
Mm.
You see?
Yeah.
And
because it was like less desirable.
Oh yeah. Who wants to live where it's going to flood every year? Exactly. Especially when Tarboro was on the other side of the Tar River and it was on high ground. Now, but the interesting thing is, one of the things that Mima had was schooling. She went to an Episcopal school for children, St. Luke's Episcopal School, mm-hmm. in Tarboro. Now that school was part of the Episcopal Church, the colored Episcopal Church in Tarboro. Now, when some of us visited Tarboro, when we went to one reunion, there were only 2 reunions, but one of the reunions, we all got in the car, Bob, our cousins and all, we rode around to look at different places. Like we went to Hobgood and looked at the house that grandfather Ruffin James built. Mm-hmm. They said he built it by his own hand. Anyway, we also stopped in Tarboro. Now, Tarboro is a small town and it's got a square with a little, it's like literally a rectangular thing with grass in the middle and trees, not very big. And on one corner of the rectangle was the colored section. And right on the rectangle by the park was St. Luke's Episcopal Church. A small Episcopal church, little white church, clapboard church with a tower. Mm-hmm. And next to it, the John William Perry House with a sign on it. It's a landmark, John William Perry House. He was the minister who started St. Luke's, who happens to be your great grandfather. Mm. Okay, so
that was his church and the school that he started.
Yes.
Okay.
So Mima was going to St. Luke's Episcopal School. Mm-hmm. And grandfather Perry, whom she later married, William Augustine Perry.
Her husband to be, her future husband.
Also went to that school.
Because his dad was
right. Was the rector of the church, the founder of the church.
Okay.
So that's where she met William Augustine Perry. And I remember Mima saying this. She said, I loved him from the time I met him.
And how old was she when she met him?
Grade school.
So she knew in elementary school that she was in love with your grandfather, my great grandfather.
Yeah. Or she was very, that's how she said it.
They met at that school.
They were both at that school. No, in Tarboro. On the other, she was being raised in Princeville, and on the other side in Tarboro was where the school was. So you see, she was able to go to school. You had to pay for it. Her cousin Orrin and Grandma Cuz paid for her to go to that school. And so in the meantime, after she finished her schooling there, she went to St. Augustine's College. They sent her to St. Augustine's College, and I think back then college kind of blended in from, like high school to college kind of thing. It was, and so she went to St. Augustine's, but Grandma Cousin and Cousin Orrin sent her with a bed, because they with a mattress, because they said those beds that they had, the straw beds or whatever, were not satisfactory for Mima. So,
well, what kind of bed did they send her with?
I don't know, like a real bed. I don't know.
But how did they get all that stuff there? Horse and buggy?
Yeah, probably. Because this would have been, she's born 1888, 98, 2000.
1900, 19...
Yeah, back in that time.
1905.
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Wow. So she went to St. Augustine.
Yeah.
Which was a historically Black, or is a historically Black college.
Yeah. And at some point she married William Augustine Perry.
And where did William Augustine Perry go to school?
He went to Yale. Well, no, wait, hold on. He went to St. Augustine's. He went to St. Augustine. That's how they pronounce it, St. Augustine's.
Oh, St. Augustine's.
Yeah, yeah. He went to St. Augustine's apparently first. Some of the literature I've seen indicates he went there first. So he and Mima were both there. But then he went on, he actually graduated from Yale. See, okay. Because with the connection that Episcopal ministers had with each other, they would have, his father would have had that information, like how to apply to Yale, how to get into Yale, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so he went to St. Augustine's with Mima, or around the same time that she went.
Yeah.
And they had already been acquainted because they went to St. Luke's as grade schoolers together in elementary school.
Yeah, and it might have been they might have had it all the way through 8th grade, or I'm not sure how far.
Till 8th grade. So then they reunite at St. Augustine's, and then they get married. Do you know what year they got married?
No, but it had to be because Mother was born in 1913.
Okay.
So somewhere between, somewhere in there they got married, and it's probably written down someplace, but
okay,
I just don't recall.
So they got married somewhere before 1913.
Like, hope, yeah.
Right. And did they move somewhere else? Where did they go?
Okay, so Grandfather Perry, when he finished Yale, took a position in Brunswick, Georgia,
okay,
at St. Athanasius School, which was, as best I can gather now, an Episcopal school, a boarding school for colored children.
A boarding school?
Yeah, and he was the principal.
Oh, so parents would send their kids there from all over?
No, probably locally.
Oh, okay.
Or, local region.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's my understanding, that it was a boarding school. And so Mother's early years, the first child in that family was Aunt Mabel. And then Mother came along, I don't know, 9 months later or something like that. And see, Mother had this personality. She remembered these things. And she said people would say, "You took the milk out of Mabel's mouth." I don't know, they were probably kidding, but she took it to heart, you know, and she
Yeah.
always,
Or as a child.
yeah, why would they say that? You know,
Yeah, of
she
course.
wasn't the one having the kids. Oh,
So,
wait, what
okay,
happened?
so,
Wait,
huh? I
wait, hold.
see you. You're fine. I
Oh,
see you.
I just lost you. Oh, wait.
I'm here.
Well, where are you?
You can't see me?
No, I can't see. Wait, I'll fix it. That happened before.
It says you're still there.
Yeah, I'm still here, but what happened to your picture?
Oh, that just might mean like there's a, it could be just like the internet.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you.
But you can't see me? Can you see me?
Not yet.
Okay.
I'm waiting. Let's see. That, yeah.
Can't see me?
Oh, this is so annoying.
Well, I can see you, so I don't know why you can't see me.
Okay. I'm gonna click on.
What you gonna click on?
Oh no, that's the.
Well, it just says like my letter. It just says like J.
No, it doesn't say anything.
Oh,
It must be.
but you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Wait, let me try this. I don't want to lose you.
Yeah, don't press anything.
No, I'm not going to press anything. I'm just trying to see what it.
Well, we can stop there because I feel like, if you can't, I can see you.
Okay. All right. I'll just keep talking then.
Yeah, I can see you. Can you see yourself?
No,
Oh, you can't see yourself either?
no, I don't know what's. Wait a minute. Let's see.
Is there some sort of sign that came up on your
No.
computer?
Oh, there you are. I had to go back to the Zoom symbol, the Zoom symbol.
Yes.
Okay, where were we? Okay, so he was principal of. Oh, I was talking about mother's memories. Another memory she had of St. Athanasius School was that. I think you mentioned this yesterday, maybe, but um, one of the boys. She and Aunt Mabel were standing outside on the grass on the campus of the school. And one of the boys who attended the school came by and gave each one of them, he said, hold out your hand.
Oh, yeah.
And he gave each one of them a coin, a small coin, you know.
Uh-huh.
And apparently so they took it. And apparently grandfather Perry saw it and he came over and he said, what did he give you? And and they had their hands behind their back. And he said, let me see your hands. And mother, being the goody girl, opened her hand and the coin was there. And Aunt Mabel dropped hers on the ground. That's what mother said. Aunt Mabel was the schemer and she dropped hers on the ground.
Oh.
Held out her hand. So mother said that grandfather, see, this is Victorian attitude back then toward children. Grandfather Perry put her in a closet, locked her in a closet, said, don't do that again, or something like that. But she was terrified in the closet. And she described, I can still hear her describing this to us, that she must have been like 5 or 6 years old. She got down where she could see light under the edge of the door. And she was trying to get down far enough so she could see outside because it was dark in the closet. And she was crying and everything, you know, and that was one of her memories.
Mm.
And another memory she had was that she and Aunt Mabel were supposed to be watching their little brother. Wait a minute. Yeah.
Mm.
They were supposed to be watching their little brother, and he was sick. And somehow he got up and they all went outside. And then later he died. He
The
was
same
just,
day?
no, I don't know about the same day, but later he got worse and he died. And they blamed, mother said they blamed her for allowing him to go outside.
Wow.
But they were just little kids, you know, they were like 7, 8, 6 or 7, something like that. So that was the kind of way children were raised back then, but it affected Aunt Mabel. Aunt Mabel's personality was different from mother's, and mother took it to heart, and she had these sad memories like that.
Mm. Yeah,
But
I mean, I think people don't realize that when you're a kid, you do remember stuff. I think people think you'll just forget about it, you know? But
yeah,
you remember things. That shapes who you are.
right. It was like, you killed your little brother. And it was still like, how could you say that to a little kid? But
And
that's
to
how
live
she,
with that guilt for
yeah,
your whole
that's how
life.
she remembered it, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, but then, I mean, he may, I don't know what he had, you know, but at any rate, later at the time of the crash of 1929, the Episcopal Church, I guess, was running out of money and they had to close. They had a choice, the way it was described to me, they had a choice to close St. Athanasius or Fort Valley School in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And they chose to close St. Athanasius
Wow.
in Brunswick, Georgia, not and to keep Fort Valley School, which I think was in Georgia, maybe Alabama, I'm not sure. But at any rate, so they closed the school, and it really hurt Grandfather Perry because he was invested in it.
Mm.
And she said, mother said that she never saw him cry except when they were getting on the train to leave Brunswick, you know.
Wow.
But he became, oh, and by the way, while he was there, Brother Bill, my brother Bill had done a little research when he and Michelle, his wife, went down to visit some friends who happened to live in Brunswick. They went to some archives and they found a letter that Grandfather Perry had written to W.E.B. Du Bois, which it was a copy of a letter that's on file at the University of Massachusetts archives.
Oh, wow.
A typed letter, and I have a copy somewhere, don't ask me where, but I have a copy somewhere, where he was asking Du Bois, you know, because Du Bois was from Massachusetts. He was asking him, could he recommend some reading in Negro history for his students?
Wow, that's cool. You have to find that letter.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll just have to look for it.
So go ahead.
Yeah, but anyway, so they left Brunswick and he became principal of the colored schools in Columbia, South Carolina.
And that's how the family got to Columbia, South Carolina.
Right.
So let's do a recap, because that was like a lot of information.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ruffin, so it started with Colonel Dawson went to the fancy women part of town. He had 2 sons with different fancy women who were women of color. They must have had a good relationship, because when the colonel died, who was a white Confederate man, right? Confederate soldier.
Ex-soldier, yeah.
Ex-soldier. When he passed away, he left both of his sons land.
Yeah.
And one of his sons is our descendant, Ruffin James, who met his wife, Marina Jones James. They had 14 children.
Yeah.
Mima, whose name is Susan Mabel James, before she was married, was given or was requested of their cousin Orrin and Cuz, right?
Mm-hmm. Orrin and Grandma.
To live with them because they didn't have any children. So they said, okay. And they sent Mima, who Susan Mabel James was known as, to live with them. She grew up in Princeville, right?
Yeah.
With Orrin and Cuz,
Cuz.
Grandma Cuz.
Grandma Cuz.
And cousin Orrin, who was a successful person, had what was called like a fancy house.
Well, that's what Mima said when they sneaked in.
He had a store, but it was really like a fancy house.
Yeah, at least he had a room, the room that they peeked into. That was where everybody was dancing, you know. And back then, when Mima was like 12 years old, that would have been 1900.
Right. So that was like risque.
Yeah, a little bit risque, I think.
Okay. So then at the same time, across town, there was a school.
On the other side of the Tar River.
On the other side of the Tar River, there was a school called St. Luke's that was run by John William Perry.
Yeah.
And I remember you told me that he came from London, England.
Yeah, well, that's what we were told. He came from England.
Okay.
To set up this, he came as an Episcopal priest or an Anglican priest from England, and he set up the school. I mean, the church and St. Luke's Church.
But do you know much more about that?
No, but probably with the proper research in London somewhere, you probably figure it out. Or it might be written down somewhere. I don't know. I haven't. Nobody seemed to know where it was only he came from England. That's what Mima used to say.
Okay, so he ran a school, St. Luke's School. He came from England, John William Perry. His wife's name was?
Mary Eliza Pettifer Perry.
Mary Eliza Pettifer Perry, and together they had a church and a school.
Yeah.
Episcopal church and school, St. Luke's.
Uh-huh.
And Mima, your grandmother, my great-grandmother, went to this school, St. Luke's.
Mm-hmm.
That's where she met the preacher's or the priest's son, whose name was William Augustine Perry.
Yeah.
And she knew at that moment that they would be in love. They would be husband and wife. They were.
Well, she said, I loved him from the time I first met.
I loved him from the time I saw him. And then they ended up going to the same school together, college, St. Augustine's.
Yeah.
And then they got married. They had three
children.
And that's good. And the 3 children, one of whom is your mom.
Right, Ruth Augusta Perry Curtis.
But we're going to stop there because now we're into a new generation.
Okay.
So we'll save that for another day because that was a lot of information. But this was great. Very good information. Any epiphanies, observations, anything you want to share as we close this episode? Episode 2, We Are Pioneers.
Well, we didn't mention the cousin who mother said, you want to meet your cousin? And when we were living in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, when I was like in high school, and we would go into Philadelphia to shop, and the big store was John Wanamaker. And one day she said, you want to meet your cousin? So we went across the street from Wanamaker's, and she says, "Now the way you tell your cousin is his shoes. He has really nice shoes. They're very well polished." So here's this guy with a peanut stand, and he's a cousin. He's one of Mima's cousins. And my mother called his name, and they chatted a little bit about family, and he gave us some free peanuts. But he was passing.
Passing for white. A lot of people might not know what passing means.
Yeah, he was passing for white.
Right.
So for some reason, he made a choice he'd rather pass for white and run a peanut stand in Pennsylvania, you know,
Then what?
than be stuck down south and be colored.
Well, that's an interesting story. So, but he interacted with you.
Oh yeah, no, he knew. They talked relatives and stuff like that. They talked family.
But then I thought when you're passing, you don't.
Well,
like,
nobody was around him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, nobody was around to observe. You know, for all they know, we're just customers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was his name? Do you know?
I don't remember now.
Okay. And what did you think about that as a kid?
Oh, just more stuff. I just thought it was interesting, the whole story of that side of the family, you know. Yeah.
Well, I have a question for you. Like, you know, you look more like your father, I would say.
Definitely.
Complexion wise, eyebrows.
Uh-huh.
So how did you feel? Because Aunt Susan is very light, right? Like Uncle Bill was like sort of in between.
Yeah.
And I would say you're more, I mean, you're very light too.
Well, Uncle Bill had Mima's eyes, though. Blue,
Oh.
green. Go ahead.
But I would say that you are more like on the browner.
Well, I was more identifiable as
Right. That's a good word. You're more identifiable. So
yeah.
like growing up, did that ever bother you or like?
Oh, but listen, I grew up in Tuskegee. Don't forget, I was raised on the campus of Tuskegee. We were raised on the campus of Tuskegee Institute, which was in the deep South. And we had people of all different complexions at Tuskegee, and we were all colored.
Okay.
So
no matter what,
we were all colored. I mean, Barbara Johnson had blonde hair and blue eyes, blonde straight hair. And if you saw, you know, I mean, and then Anitra Thompson was a lot darker than I was. I mean, we had the whole range.
So as kids, nobody was like, like no one talked about race and complexion.
Oh, we talked about race all the time. That's what it was all about in Tuskegee. You know, we sang spirituals. I was in the Chambliss Children's House Choir, and we sang spirituals at Christmas time. We knew who Booker T. Washington was. George Washington Carver shook my hand when I was an infant, according to Mother. I mean, it was all about our pride. We took pride in our heritage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we knew who we were, and you know, we didn't care what those people on the other side thought, because we knew who we were.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that whole thing about color just never crossed my mind. We were people we were pioneers.
Well, there you go.
Mother would say that all the time. We are pioneers.
Yeah. Because I think for me, like growing up as the grandchild, right?
Uh-huh.
And looking the way I look, which you use the word, you are identifiable. I'm very identifiable as Black. And so when I would see my cousins, the way you explained, everybody was just kind of like together. For
Uh-huh.
me, I felt very different. Like I felt like there was no one that I looked like on that side of the family. Like there was no one who I could identify with, right? Like and then when I went to my dad's side of the family, I saw people who were my complexion, and I thought,
Uh-huh.
oh, okay. Because for when I was little, for a little while, I thought I was adopted. Like
You did? Who
I
told you that?
did. No, I told myself that because
Oh,
I thought that I didn't look like anyone. Like I felt like I didn't look like, and I didn't really see dad that much, but I didn't look like you. I didn't look like Aunt Susan. I didn't look like my grandma. I didn't
well,
look like
hold on. You're
Bill.
talking only about complexion, because if you take a picture of me and your grandmother and Aunt Susan, you have we all have absolutely the same bone structure.
Yeah.
And Uncle Bill noted that. He said
I see it now, but I'm saying as a kid, I didn't.
the face shape and the cheekbones and everything, and like with my, especially with my mother, the whole face shape is the same.
Yeah, and that is true. But like you were saying in the beginning of this episode, you were saying that
Mhm.
like it does matter, race matters
Yeah,
and complexion matters. That's why you were saying grandma had all these different names of complexion,
yeah.
right?
Well, that was the 1930s, though.
But
Don't
I
forget.
still feel like now that's still a thing. When you, even as Black people, when we describe each other, sometimes we will say, oh, she's light skinned, or she's brown skinned, or she's whatever, there's still different terms like red bone and all these.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. That was one of them. Redbone. Yeah, that was one.
So yeah, like, so as a kid, I still remember looking for someone to identify with and feeling like, I don't look like anyone. Like my mom, because I live with you. So I was like, I don't look like my aunt. I
Mhm.
don't look like my mom. Am I adopted? I'm different.
And see, Aunt Susan, you have to remember that's the whole ridiculousness of this history, which is now it's starting to change. It's starting to change in terms of people getting, um, sometimes, mostly in theater and music, but also in writing and things like that, credit just as they are.
Yeah.
But um, the whole history of this whole nonsense is doesn't make any sense, except that that's what motivated people,
Yeah.
uh, but it was all about, when you come down to it, it's all about economic power, tribalism, particularly tribalism, and and you combine those two, and you've got a mess. So,
Yeah, but
but
I mean, like, that is true. But I think that, like we'll talk about this more in the next episode. But it's
yeah,
like when you talk about like the brown paper bag
oh yeah,
parties, right?
uh-huh, oh yeah,
It's like we can say, oh, we're all the same, like, right? Because we're all Black people, or back then we're all colored folks,
mm.
right? But
But
then
different.
at the same time, you still have these factors differentiating us and separating us. Like,
Yeah, the whole thing about marry fair, because your kids would have,
yeah.
of
And people still do that now.
course. And
So
especially some of the, like, Dominican Republic, for one, as I understand it, they're still doing that. But hey, what
I
are
have
you?
no comment on that.
But but anyway, it's no, it's an interesting history, and we'll get to my mother, with these when they were sailing to Martha's Vineyard, and it was windy, and Daddy was landing his boat, and these white folks sitting drinking on their motorboat. And Daddy had a sailboat, and he was very skilled at operating that sailboat. And he was trying to get the boat in the slip, and he did it successfully. And they get off the boat, and they're walking into town to get dinner. And this idiot white guy comes walking up behind and wants to say, you know, we take care of our boats here. My mother turned around. Oh, don't do that. My mother turned around, and she would tell the story. And I know, because her face would get all red. If she got mad, she would tell people. And see, there were, if it were she had advantages, I have to say that, because if it were a dark complected Black woman, I don't know whether it would have had the same effect. But at that time, we're talking back in the 50s, 60s. So in the 60s, that would have been in the 60s. But she turned around to this white guy, beer drinker, and she says, do you know who you are talking to? You are talking to Dr. William C. Curtis, Harvard, PhD, engineer. Get down, dog.
That's right.
And she would do stuff like,
just channeling her right then. Like, I felt that.
she would do that all the time. And when she passed and we were cleaning out the house, I think I told you this, there were all these letters that she had written to the principal of the high school that I went to, telling him, don't you pay short shrift to my child. Don't you do that.
Don't you what?
Short shrift, well, you know, it's a term, it just means like ignoring her or acting like she's unworthy or something.
Short shrift.
Yeah.
Okay.
She was like, don't you do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because they would do stuff like that. And I wasn't even aware of the fact that she was writing all these letters all the time. But, you know, that was
you were called poison pen letters?
No, it wasn't a poison pen letter. She signed her name, but she just said, you know, you don't know who you're dealing with here. We are this and we are that. You know, she was educating. Her approach was to tell people about themselves and to tell them they were wrong.
Mm. That sounds familiar.
What do you mean?
Huh. I wonder who else does that. But anyway,
well, I do. I get more like my mother the older I get.
Yes, but no, I think this is a good time because this was a lot of information.
Yeah.
I think this is a good time to, you know, stop and reflect on all that we've covered so far in episode 2 of We Are Pioneers. Woo!
All right.
Yeah, and I think, you know, next we will talk about the generation of my grandmother, your mother, and how they grew up and like what their experience was, because I think grandma, she was a very adventurous, spunky woman. Like,
she
she was very spunky. She had a lot of spunk, and so that we can think about that for the episode 3. Okay. So yeah, this was great. We Are Pioneers, episode 3. Thank you, Mom, for all of the amazing information that you've shared with us. And
that's only part, but we did our best.
Well, what?
I said that's only, you know, there's a lot more, but we hit on the high points, on the main points.
Yes, and we can go deeper. You know, this is more of This is an introduction, honey.
Okay.
This isn't even the book. This is an introduction.
Because we'll do this next time. I'll talk about it.
What?
It was a letter from Grandfather Perry to Mother. February 5th, 1937, when she was, before she got married, and she was, you know, in New York, and
Oh, well, I think, yeah, I think we should save that so that people can have something to look forward to for the next part of the story. But don't put that box back.
No, it's not going back. Don't worry.
Okay. So you can see from episode 2 why this family is full of pioneers. And I look forward to revisiting all of this and picking up the story where it left off for episode 3.
Okay. All right.
Thanks,
Okay.
Mama.
Thanks.
I'll call
Bye.
you after.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye. Let's see.